to town meeting, our budget hearing to talk about the FY21 budget. Before we go ahead and get started in talking about the budget for the town meeting, I'm going to have Scott, if you wouldn't mind, providing some guidance around logistics around this meeting.
Yeah, sure. So currently we have a small group, but that can change rapidly on Zoom. And we also have to be sensitive to potential hackers or ne'er-do-wells dropping in and wreaking havoc. So what we're going to do is, once Victor starts the presentation of the budget, I'm going to mute everybody from here as host. And you may not be able to unmute yourselves. I can control that. So Victor will have the floor. And then I would ask that if you have questions or comments, if you could use the Zoom chat to send me your question or comment, and include your name and street address, just so we have that for the record. And I'll read those. And again, if it's I'd like to get through any initial comments or questions. And then if it remains a small group, we can open it up a little bit. I just want to make sure we can get through the key part of this before anything bad were to happen. So that's what we'll do. If there's any questions, just shoot me a question through chat.
Great, thanks, Scott. So what I'm going to do here is put up essentially the presentation. And I'll put it into presentation mode. All right, so welcome to the Town of Carlisle's FY21 budget hearing. This is in advance of the annual town meeting. We plan to have this every year. Unfortunately, this year it's a little bit, we are having this via Zoom. Normally this is an in-person meeting and discussion. And really, let's take it that way. We have a small group today. Obviously, if you have any questions, Scott has actually highlighted how to submit those questions, and we can certainly address them as we kind of go along through the discussion. And it's been a really unusual year. Obviously, folks realize the situation that we've been in with COVID, the social distancing, keeping the individuals away, and people kind of stay at home types of order. And it's been a very interesting year from the standpoint of the budget as well. So just as a side of context, FinCom had actually completed its recommendation for FY21 roughly about the time that the COVID situation became an issue, and when began to have the social distancing kind of put into place. And really, it's actually had us to go back through those discussions again to really think through the implications of COVID. And one of the things that's really been very clear in terms of our discussions, really at the outset, is that COVID has brought about a great deal of uncertainty. There's uncertainty in terms of revenue, and especially state aid. There's uncertainty in terms of how our schools will operate, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And there's questions about the economy. There's right now, I don't know if you kind of kept in touch with the news. A week ago, they noted that unemployment was actually getting better unexpectedly to actually economists. And then this week you see this massive drop, actually today, a massive drop in the stock market, because now people are concerned about future layoffs, as well as the comeback of COVID as the second wave. So I think the general theme that we've actually had to handle as a FinCom has been uncertainty. And I think very early on, I think our goal really was to look at the budget from the standpoint of how can we actually garner more certainty to be able to provide really a well thought through, to the best that we can, budget for FY21. And I think ultimate conclusion was that the best way to do it was really to postpone the decision. And you actually may have seen this in the newspaper, Mosquito, where we had recommended to the Board of Selectmen to postpone the annual town meeting so we could actually gather some additional information around these uncertainties. We'll never be 100% sure, and everything won't be 100% answered, but we felt that, given a few months, we definitely would have a bit more clarity that would really help us provide a good recommendation. And really, that's the backdrop for this evening. And ultimately, our recommendation to the town that we'll provide in about a week or so, a week from Saturday, and certainly a point of discussion if you have any questions this evening for us around that. So if I go to the one and only slide that we'll talk about, as well as kind of running through the detail of the budget, which was actually included in the warrant. I'm not too sure where it is in the process of being delivered to your homes, but I have a copy of that page of Article 11, which actually has the budget. But at the top line, FinCom recommends an operating budget flat to FY20, with the expectation that the town will have a meeting in the fall where we'll actually go and further refine this budget. And really the key considerations that came into play coming to this recommendation really is that given a few months, there will be a great deal more clarity in terms of certain components of the budget. The most significant one being actually the schools. So there's two aspects of that. One is, how will our schools operate? And there are initial thoughts, and actually some towns are already making some decisions as to how they will operate in this kind of COVID situation. But it's not necessarily vetted out and clear for our schools yet at this point. They're currently very actively considering options, but ultimately, depending on what those decisions are, that would obviously have an implication potentially on expenses and such. So having more clarity around that in a few months certainly would help us to provide a more thoughtful budget. The second item there really is the dependency of our schools on state aid. Schools are 60% of our overall budget, both our CPS as well as the regional, and they also gained their funding through Chapter 70, Chapter 71. They have a circuit breaker, which is for the regional school, and it amounts to a significant revenue source for them around paying for some of the expenses that they have. And we believe that come later summer, early fall, then there would be a lot more clarity around what type of aid that we would expect from the state. The second bullet highlights that we'll have a better understanding of the economic impact. As I noted, and I think you heard in the news probably a week or two ago, said unemployment is coming down a bit. But I also had in the back of my mind, keeping up with the news, that there are some industries who haven't even started their reductions. The airline industry specifically had said that in the coming months, they had some substantial reductions that they were going to take. So too early to tell from the standpoint of overall economic impact. And given a few more months, we'll have a better sense of how unemployment is trending. We'll see how COVID, whether we have a rebound from COVID in terms of the trends of COVID hospitalizations and such. And so given a few months, we definitely have a better sense of the trajectory. Our understanding, and I think it's a broader one than just us, you actually hear it, is that this is not a one-year economic impact scenario. This is going to be multi-year. So that has brought a bit of soberness from the standpoint of FinCom to try to get as much information as we can to make the best decision for the town. The last consideration around a flat budget really is to try to minimize disruption to current operations. If we were to come in and to make a decision around budget reductions to the departments, guesstimating on incomplete information, come the town meet and they make changes, come the next town meeting, we may make even a deeper cut, and then they have to make additional reductions and changes again. So one part of goal of recommending a flat operating budget and pushing that decision down towards a second town meeting in terms of getting a refined budget is to allow the towns to operate as they are and make those more significant changes once in terms of disruption. So really that is the three kind of key considerations that we had made. Gaining clarity in terms of uncertainty, that's around revenue, both from the standpoint of individuals, residents which is connected to unemployment. Also from the standpoint of revenue from the state, that's the second. And the third is obviously the most significant component of our budget is a bit uncertain in terms of the expenses due to them in the planning stages now of trying to identify how we will do school in the fall. So those really the key considerations. So what does this mean and does this not mean? So if you actually, and we'll review this shortly, our recommended short-term, and I call it short-term because our expectations that we'll revisit this in the fall, is really an adjustment off of the December guideline. Now, what the December guideline is our first pass of FY21 budget, and based upon where we were landed at that point, a flat budget would be a reduction of 2.5% versus the December guideline. So if you do the math, the December guideline was about 2.5 or roughly around that higher than essentially the FY20 budget, since we're recommending a flat budget. The other note here around what this means is that our recommendation does not include capital items. I think decisions around capital purchases, we're looking to postpone those decisions to the next town meeting. So capital items are not included in our recommended budget. And those capital items are in addition to obviously the operating budget. And so there's no warrant within there's no article within the warrant book that actually has these capital items, which we normally would have. The second bullet item highlights our direction, and we actually had drafted a memo that I'm not too sure if it went out today, but we drafted it with the Board of Selectmen. And the direction to the departments, boards, and commissions is really to continue their operations and to continue to minimize discretionary spend. And that's been the direction that we've provided them through the spring. And it's that continued discretionary spends to minimize it as much as possible. That's not to say not to spend, but where you have a choice and it's not necessary to postpone that. But also, I think the more important thing, this goes back to the point around minimizing disruption, is to maintain current staffing and organization until the next town meeting. I'd said in a different way, the budget as we provide it in a flat operating budget, because we are recommending that, do not go and make changes to your staffing and organization. If you had planned to do so, regardless of what budget was, you're welcome to do so, but do not let essentially this flat operating budget kind of force you to go about and restructure your staffing and organization. And that's a postponement only to the next town meeting, when we actually we'll have a more refined budget. And with essentially a bit more information about the schools, about revenue coming in, as well as the economic impact of it. So those are really the key summary points around our recommendation around the flat operating budget. And maybe what I can do here is just very quickly go through what that looks like from the standpoint of the budget. And that means I'll have to share something different here. Hold on one moment. And this is actually in the warrant book. So when you receive your warrant books, you will also see this as Article 11 in your warrant. So let me just pull this up. All right. So hopefully you all can see that. I'm going to move this little box here. All right. So as we noted earlier, FY20 is actually in the middle column. The FY21, what I call the COVID budget recommendation, which is our short-term recommendation until the next town meeting, is you look at general government. Subtotal, absolutely the same. No changes there. If you move down to the next one, protection of persons and personal property, that includes fire, police, communications, conscom, all these groups here, no change. Same thing with Department of Public Works. All of their line items are the same. 1.2 million change. Health and Human Services, same. Education is the same. And you see the pattern. Culture and Recreation, which are library and recreation. It is only when you get to these two items here that you actually see some changes. And what I'm going to do, and I don't know if I can do this so they can see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this line right here. This is our reserve fund balance. And one of the things that we discussed FinCom is that in light of uncertainty, you want to make sure you have some certainty by ensuring that you have some reserves. And normally we keep about $150,000 in the reserve fund balance. In light of the uncertainty we're experiencing, we actually doubled that to 300,000, and that will allow us to account for any unexpected types of things that kind of come up due to COVID or due to general operations as well. Where we did offset this, because it's ultimately a flat budget, is really this line item here. This is OPEB trust, is our future obligations. And essentially we reduced that from the $425,000 contribution to, we did math to keep it flat. It's a 209. So there's a difference of about $150,000 in there. So, long story short, this budget at the very bottom line ends up to be generally basically flat, except for a change in terms of debt service. So I probably should have added a separate line here that didn't include debt service. But debt service, we put the actuals in here in terms of the debt service. And so here in the total operating budget, you see a slight difference in terms of the number, but it's truly due to debt service. When you look at all of the departmental budgets and all the other line items, here it's noted as exactly the same, with the changes that have offset each other being the reserve fund balance and OPEB. We offset each other to make it flat. So with this is really the comments that we had for this evening. Normally there's a lot more discussions that we'd have in terms of revenue sources and all of those items, but the reality is that this is a flat budget recommendation, short term, so that we can ensure that we maintain some stability within our departments, allow them to operate without causing lots of disruption, as well as allowing us a few months to be able to gain some more certain, and we'll never be 100% certain, but more certainty around revenues being state and also are coming from residents through taxes, as well as what's happening with the schools and how they need to operate, which is, as I noted earlier, that 60% of our budget is schools. So I'll just kind of pause in terms of the comments. And Scott, are there any questions that have come up through the chat?
I don't have any questions yet through the chat, so give it another minute. If none come through the chat, then what I'll do is we can just open it up and
yep.
people will be able to unmute themselves. So seeing no comments at this point or no questions via chat, folks can unmute themselves if they have any comments or questions they want to make over. And again, this is being recorded. And a copy of the recording will be available via the Mosquito website.
Hi, this is Bob Zog. I have a question at 923 North Road. I understand that obviously COVID-19 has been really disruptive for everyone, but it would seem that Carlisle would be in a much better position than most towns given our low dependence on business taxes. Can you comment on that a little bit? And maybe I just don't understand the magnitude of the numbers, why the state, I understand that the state resources might be in question, but it would seem that the vast majority of our resources come from property taxes, and I would think they would be relatively certain.
Yep, that's a good question. So just 2 points of comment there. So if you think about it in terms of revenue to the schools, and I'm going to use an example from the last recession that we had. So from the standpoint of the high school, in terms of state revenue, the Chapter 70 was a relatively small reduction. It was about 2-3%. Where they got more significantly impact was their circuit breaker as well as their Chapter 71. But when you rolled all of that up, that was about 11% difference in terms of the revenue that they received from the state. That's fairly substantial. I think it was about $500,000 that comes about through that. Carlisle itself, I think we're basically flat. We weren't impacted significantly from the school's perspective. I think the other comment that I would make is really the uncertainty around unemployment and projections and things are always difficult. There was one study that I think was circulated among the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen that Carlisle was experiencing trending up towards 20%. I don't know how valid it was, but I think allowing for, and that obviously impacts our residents' inability to pay their taxes as well as their expenses. So whenever we actually do these budgets, those are key considerations we make, right? Especially in the recent years, since we've had pretty much from the standpoint of new growth, it has not tracked with the increases in expenses. So we're always very, very considerate and thinking through the impact to our residents. And I think that's part of the thought process as well, given the fact that the economy is a bit uncertain and seeing what that implication is perhaps in the fall and where it's actually trending to.
Victor, if I could just add one comment to
Sure.
that, which is that, you know, when you talk about uncertainty, and then you mentioned the possible 20% unemployment, you know, we're in an environment where the past may not tell us very much about what to expect when you think about property taxes. I think Bob is quite right that that's a resilient source of revenue. But, you know, if just hypothetically, if 20% of our residents have sustained unemployment for a year or more, then that may well impact property taxes. So, you know, the real answer, as you've said, is we just don't know. So we want to try to be cautious.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
If I could just follow up briefly on that. So just so I understand, if someone were unemployed because of the recession or whatever, how does that impact their property tax liability?
It doesn't change it. It's just they might
Right.
not pay.
That's right.
Oh, okay. So people just default on their taxes
Right.
then,
Yes.
presumably.
Yeah.
Which impacts our revenue.
Right. Understood. Thank you.
Collection revenue would be down then.
We have a question from Tatiana White on Aberdeen Drive. And the question is simply, how did tax collections compare to budget? So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, so far this year, as we end fiscal 20, how have tax collections progressed and how do they compare to previous years? And maybe Kim, you can answer that question.
We're actually right on. We're doing well with the taxes. We did extend the due date. It didn't change it too much from May 1. Most of the banks all made the payments. Most people made their payments. The collection's looking good. I won't really know the total until July 1 because the Board of Selectmen are allowing no penalty till June 30th. So people can wait till June 30th to actually pay it. So there is some outstanding. It's not a lot, but I won't know until actually it becomes delinquent on July 1. But right now, the impact is not showing in the taxes. It may be different for the July 1 billing, but right now we're good.
Thank you.
Also, I'll add local receipt. When Priscilla's on, we did hit our mark on what we estimated for local receipts in. So for fiscal 20, we're in good shape.
Great. And any other questions?
Sorry, there's no questions on the chat, Victor.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. So if there are no other questions, we can essentially close the budget hearing. But what I would say is that, you know, if there are additional questions that you have as you review the warrant and the specific article around the budget, or have any questions, you know, FinCom, we have, you know, obviously open meetings, and you're welcome to join those, or you could reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat with you about any questions that you may have. So if there aren't any further ones since then, hopefully we'll see you at town meeting on the 20th. Go ahead.
Just a follow-up question from Tatiana
Okay.
White of Aberdeen Drive, and it's what percentage of the town budget comes from the state? And I believe it's around, Kim, do you have that number off the top of your head? It's about,
Yeah, I have the,
I think it's about 4 to 6% is what I think it is.
local receipts is 1,139,000. And the total budget's around 30 million.
So
But
local
that doesn't
receipts,
reflect the high school though, right, Kim? The high school gets state aid.
Correct. The high school, but that's in their budget. That doesn't do anything.
Yeah, but you referred to 30 million, you know.
Right.
Oh, well, with the whole thing, yeah, the whole budget.
so
But
the state aid, the chapter 70 we get, that's roughly $1.5 million a year, correct?
It's 1.139 is everything. Chapter 70, unrestricted, all that. That's our cherry sheet.
Yeah.
For everything.
So last year's budget discussion or presentation, state represented about 4.5% of the overall FY20 sources of revenue that we're projecting. So less than 5%.
And again, that was the only additional question I had gotten.
Okay. Well, we'll make one more call. Any final questions? Maybe Tatiana, if you have a follow-up to that one, certainly. You can unmute yourself as well. Feel free to do that if you'd rather do that in chat.
Actually, I'll correct it. Looking at it's 1.14 for state aid and the 1.139 was the local receipts.
Okay, good.
So sorry, looking at my tiny numbers.
And the school does not include in that number, the school does receive circuit breaker, which goes directly to the school. So that's not state aid in the same sense that we're referring to, but that's additional monies that I think is in the low hundreds of thousands, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, that number changes every year.
Right.
It changes.
Right. But isn't it? It's usually around less than 500,000, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's just to give a relative sense. All told, it's somewhere less than $2 million, but probably between $1.5 million and $2 million in state aid and circuit breaker.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, if there's no other questions, as I said, always feel free to reach out to myself or anyone from FinCom. Certainly appreciate you coming out this evening or connecting in, I guess is the better way of saying it, and really hearing essentially what our recommendation will be, the questions that you ask. We always appreciate the engagement that we have from the community around that. I also want to just thank all the FinCom members as well, because this is our second round through the FY21 budget, and we will end up doing a third round just to do 1 year of budget. And all the hours that you put in, definitely appreciate all the time that we spend on that. All right. So if that's okay, if there are no other questions, we can certainly close the hearing, and we'll see you at the annual town meeting.
You all on a week from Saturday.
Yep, we'll be there.
Victor, since you've been involved in the logistics, where do we go, this committee? Is there we just sit in the audience? Is that the?
Yeah, that will be, so I think the exact positioning isn't finalized, but it will not be the typical sit up at the front at a table and whatnot. That one we already decided that will not be the case. How we organize, 6 foot in between, how we do that we'll figure out in the next meeting.
Still working on it. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Very good. Let's see who's still on here.
Thank you all. Good evening.
Yeah.
Good night,
Very
Alan.
good. Good night.
Good night.
You guys run a lot shorter meetings than we do.
Take care.
Great. Thanks.
So are we, do we need to adjourn the budget hearing?
Yes.
I'm still recording, so.
Motion to
I don't know when
adjourn.
to stop.
I move we adjourn the budget hearing.
A second.
All right, roll call.
Dar, yes?
Dalia, yes.
Liang, yes.
Trioli, yes.
And I think that was it. Everything we're good.